The courtroom already felt uneasy that morning, even before the case was called. People shifted in their chairs the way people do when they've been sitting too long. Someone in the back quietly folded a newspaper. A man near the aisle tapped his pen against a legal pad, the sound small but persistent. Papers rustled here and there. The low murmur of quiet conversations drifted through the room and bounced softly off the walls before dissolving beneath the steady buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was an ordinary court day. Another long line of small disputes, traffic tickets, parking violations, minor arguments that to the outside world might seem insignificant. But inside a courtroom, even small problems feel big to the people standing at that podium. Then the clerk cleared his throat and called the next case. Case number 47, parking violations. A few people glanced up, nothing unusual. Parking tickets were about as routine as it gets in a municipal courtroom. Most of the time, those cases lasted barely 3 minutes, sometimes less. The defendant would explain, the judge would respond, a fine would be reduced or confirmed, and everyone would move on. Simple, ordinary, just another file in a very long stack. But the moment the defendant stepped forward, something subtle shifted in the room. She was tiny, so small that the wooden podium in front of her seemed almost too tall. She reached it slowly, carefully, one step at a time. Her shoulders were bent slightly forward with age, the way shoulders bend after carrying many decades of living. In one hand, she held a worn wooden cane, polished smooth from years of use. Her gray hair was gathered neatly into a bun at the back of her head, the kind of careful hairstyle someone might do out of habit every morning without even thinking. She wore a faded blue coat that looked like it had been hanging in the same closet for many years. Clean, well cared for, but unmistakably old. Older, perhaps, than some of the younger people sitting in the gallery. She stood there quietly, 90 years old. The bailiff noticed the way she hesitated at the microphone and stepped forward gently. "Right here, ma'am," he said softly, adjusting the microphone so it lowered closer to her height. She gave him a grateful nod. Up on the bench sat Judge Judy, already turning the pages of the thin file in front of her. Judge Judy had seen tens of thousands of cases in her lifetime. Parking tickets rarely required much attention. But as she skimmed the paperwork, something about the file made her pause. She looked down. Then she looked up at the woman standing at the podium. Then she looked down again. Her eyes narrowed slightly, because what the file described didn't quite match the fragile figure standing there. 3 unpaid parking tickets, accumulated late fees, court processing charges, total owed $480. Judge Judy leaned back slightly in her chair. Then she lowered the file and looked over the top of her reading glasses. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice cut cleanly through the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried with the firmness of someone who had spent decades speaking in courtrooms. "You're 90 years old." She paused for a beat. "And you've managed to collect 3 parking violations." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the gallery. Not mocking laughter, just the kind people make when something catches them slightly off guard. The elderly woman offered a small, polite smile. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Judy lifted the file again. "These aren't recent tickets," she continued. She flipped one page, then another. "This one is from 6 months ago. The next one, 8 months. And this one is nearly a year old." She closed the folder and placed it on the bench with a firm tap. "So let's start with something simple." Her gaze locked directly onto the woman. "Why didn't you pay them?" The question settled into the air between them. Simple, direct. The kind of question that usually leads to a very quick answer. But the old woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she adjusted her hand on the handle of her cane. Her fingers moved slowly, as if the wood gave her something steady to hold on to while she chose her words. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "Well, Your Honor," she hesitated for a moment. "I was trying to save my grandson." The courtroom became very still. Not the normal quiet of people waiting. A deeper quiet, the kind that spreads slowly across a room, like ripples moving outward across the surface of calm water. Judge Judy did not react immediately, but one eyebrow lifted slightly. "Save your grandson?" "Yes." Judge Judy leaned forward just a little. "From what?" The woman inhaled gently. Her answer came almost like a whisper. "From prison?" Now the silence in the room became complete. Even the bailiff, who had been stepping back toward his post, stopped moving for a moment. Judge Judy folded her hands together on the desk. She studied the woman carefully. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said. "You have my attention." The grandmother's name was Margaret Collins, 90 years old, widowed for 17 years. She had lived in the same small house for 42 years, long enough that the paint on the porch had been redone several times, and the oak tree in the front yard had grown taller than the roof. She had raised 3 children in that house, 3 children who had once run down the hallway in the mornings before school, 3 children who had once left muddy shoes near the front door and cereal bowls in the sink. But none of that was the part of the story that mattered in that courtroom that morning. The part that mattered began with her grandson, Daniel, 22 years old. A young man who, according to his grandmother, had made what she described quietly as one terrible mistake. Judge Judy listened with the kind of focus that had made her reputation what it was. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer opinions. She simply watched. Margaret explained that Daniel had been arrested the previous year. Wrong friends, bad influence, a group of people who made decisions without thinking about consequences. And Daniel, like many young men his age, had followed them down a path he should never have stepped onto. The charge against him was serious, serious enough that the word prison had entered the conversation. And then there was the bail, $8,000. Judge Judy tapped her pen slowly against the desk. "So you paid the bail?" Margaret nodded. "Yes." "With what money?" The question came quickly. Margaret hesitated for a moment. Then she answered honestly, "My savings." Judge Judy did not look impressed. "How much savings does a 90-year-old woman have, Mrs. Collins?" Margaret gave a small, tired smile. "Not much anymore." Judge Judy waited. Margaret continued, "I sold my car." That answer made Judge Judy pause. "You sold your car?" "Yes." Judge Judy tapped the ticket file again. "And yet these parking tickets were issued to that same car." Margaret nodded slowly. "They were from before I sold it." "And you didn't pay them?" "No." "Why not?" Margaret's voice softened. "Because I needed every dollar." Judge Judy leaned back again. "These tickets added up to nearly $500. "Yes." "And you decided that money was better used getting your grandson out of jail?" Margaret nodded gently. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Judy stared at her for a long moment. The judge was known for many things: sharp questions, an intolerance for nonsense, a legendary impatience with excuses. But this situation didn't feel like nonsense, and it didn't feel like an excuse either. Still, Judge Judy never accepted emotional explanations without testing them. "Mrs. Collins," she said firmly, "let me explain something to you." Margaret nodded politely. Judge Judy pointed toward the file. "These laws exist for a reason." "Yes, Your Honor. If everyone decided their personal problems were more important than the law, we would have chaos." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Judy tilted her head slightly. "So tell me something. Did your grandson ask you to do this?" Margaret shook her head immediately. "Oh, no. He didn't know." Judge Judy blinked once. "He didn't know?" "No." "So he doesn't know you sold your car?" Margaret smiled faintly. "No." "He doesn't know you ignored these tickets?" "No." Judge Judy tapped the desk. "Why not?" Margaret looked down briefly at the floor beside her cane. Then she answered quietly, "Because he already feels guilty." People sitting in the gallery shifted in their seats, because suddenly the case wasn't about parking tickets anymore. It was about something deeper, something older than any law book: sacrifice. Judge Judy cleared her throat. "But that's not the end of the story, is it?" Margaret shook her head. "No." Judge Judy gestured gently. "Go on," Margaret continued. "After Daniel was released on bail, he came home, ashamed, embarrassed, frightened about what might happen next. But then something surprising happened. He changed, slowly at first. He found a job at a hardware store. He began attending night classes at the local community college. He stopped seeing the friends who had dragged him into trouble. Little by little, week by week, he began rebuilding his life." Judge Judy nodded once. "That's good," Margaret smiled. "Yes, but it meant something else, too." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "What?" Margaret spoke quietly. "It meant he never knew how close he came to losing everything." Judge Judy studied her carefully. "And now?" Margaret took a breath. "He graduates next week." A quiet murmur moved through the courtroom. Judge Judy raised her hand. The room became silent again. So let me get this straight. She pointed her pen toward Margaret. You sold your car. Yes. You emptied your savings. Yes. You ignored these tickets. Yes. All so that your grandson could have a second chance. Margaret nodded softly. Yes. Judge Judy slowly closed the file. Then Judge Judy asked a question no one expected. Mrs. Collins, how did you get to court today? Margaret blinked. Well, I took the bus. Judge Judy tilted her head. You took the bus? Yes. How long did that take? Margaret thought for a moment. About 2 hours. Judge Judy leaned forward. 2 hours each way? Yes. Judge Judy glanced at the clock on the wall. So you left your house at what time? Margaret smiled gently. 6 in the morning. Several people in the gallery quietly shook their heads. Judge Judy rubbed her temple briefly. Then she asked another question. Why didn't you simply ignore the tickets altogether? Margaret answered immediately. Because the law matters. Judge Judy looked up sharply. Margaret continued. I didn't want my grandson thinking the rules don't apply to him. The silence deepened again. Margaret added softly, so when the court notice came, I came. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses, and for several seconds, she said nothing at all. Finally, she cleared her throat. Mrs. Collins. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Judy leaned forward again. Her voice was firm, clear, but beneath the firmness, something human could be heard. You made a mistake. Margaret nodded. Yes. You ignored legal obligations. Yes. Judge Judy paused. But you did it for a reason that most people in this courtroom understand? Margaret remained silent. Judge Judy tapped the ticket file one final time. Then she closed it. Hard. Here is my ruling. The courtroom leaned forward. These tickets, she paused, are dismissed. Gasps spread across the room. Margaret looked stunned. Your Honor, Judge Judy raised a hand. I'm not finished. Silence returned. But let me make something very clear. She pointed gently toward Margaret. What you did was not legally correct. Margaret nodded. I know. But what you did as a grandmother, Judge Judy paused, was extraordinary. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Judge Judy leaned back. And if your grandson graduates next week, she tapped the desk, he had better bring you his diploma. Laughter broke through the courtroom. Judge Judy added sharply, and if he doesn't, I will personally give him his first lesson in responsibility. The room erupted. Even the bailiff smiled. Margaret wiped her eyes. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Judy nodded once. Case dismissed. As Margaret slowly walked away from the podium, Judge Judy spoke one final time, not to the grandmother, but to everyone in the room. People think the law is about punishment. She looked across the gallery. It isn't. It's about responsibility. She paused. And sometimes, her voice softened slightly, it's also about recognizing the people who quietly carry the weight of someone else's mistakes. The gavel struck the desk, and the entire courtroom seemed to exhale.